us to induce out-of-body experiences. And sometimes while going out-of-body, we would reach the limit of this thing, sort of a device that looked like it was generating the hologram that we're living in.
Mm.
And then we would be brought back from being out-of-body and questioned about what we saw. And I remember being told during those years that device that was propagating our reality they were calling the Matrix, which obviously that concept later found its way into a feature film.
Indeed.
So they were inducing OBEs, and in that sense we were involved in kind of the telepathy testing and the out-of-body experiences that were being researched at places like J.B. Rhine's Parapsychology Research Unit in North Carolina, and also the Monroe Institute of Robert Monroe.
Yeah.
And that was, contemporaneous with that era of psychic exploration. I think it was undoubtedly related to that, because that was something that the U.S. intelligence community was very actively investigating during those years. Now, in terms of time travel per se, we had our first time travel experiences in the learning lab, not only performing conventional remote viewing for the military. We would have these exercises where a team leader and a U.S. naval officer would come to the learning lab and set up some sort of practical exercise where we would be asked to remotely view something, some sort of military target or priority. But they also brought a device into the learning lab called the Montauk-chair.
Ah.
And this is another device that has been rumored to have been developed by Nikola Tesla. I'm not sure that that's the case, but some researchers allege that it's another Tesla device.
Yes.
It basically looks like a dental chair, and you sit in it, and there's a tube of some kind at your feet that comes up and is pointed at your head, and there's sort of a photographer's umbrella above your head, and there's a solenoid on the back of the chair right behind your solar plexus. And I remember there was something called a CPU, which I never understood what that meant. There was a computer processing unit under the chair. And you would sit in this chair, and you would wear a mask with some light diodes placed on top of the cotton mask over your eyes, and a headset on your ears. And this chair would generate this strange, syncopated, almost musically or mathematically beautiful set of sound tones. And you'd have a dissociative experience where you'd hover out of your body and feel yourself rushing forward in time. Feet first, actually, almost like a toboggan or a sluice rider. And you'd see something forming on the horizon, and then you'd hit it. You'd suddenly smack into it, and you would find yourself in a subjective moment in your own personal future. It was literally basically an induced astral projection. And then we would suddenly find ourselves back in the chair, very exhausted, I remember, and somebody would question us about what we were doing and seeing. For example, if we found ourselves, 40 years in the future watching television, they would say things like, well, do you remember what was on the television set? Oh, the president was addressing the American people. What was his name, etc.
Yeah.
So that was a way of gathering information about the future by astrally projecting the time traveler to that location. And I think it's pretty much consistent with the account of time travel that has appeared in the Montauk Project book series of Preston Nichols and Peter Moon. The chair, we know, was developed or at least tested at the Montauk Naval Air Station in Long Island, and we know from Dr. David Anderson that in 1970, the very time that's consistent with my account of what I experienced, the Montauk-chair sort of went national, and they involved thousands of American school children in these probes to their own futures as a way of gathering intelligence about future events. And so I would caption that technology under the rubric of psychic time travel. It was basically an induced astral projection. And we did that the whole time we were in the project. And curiously, ever since then, I've had episodes of deja vu where I find myself in the location in my life, the time and place that they had preternaturally sent me to as an 8 and 9-year-old back in New Jersey when I was enrolled in Project Pegasus. But Project Pegasus wasn't just a parapsychology lab, and it wasn't just an advanced research project involving gifted and talented American school children, because some of us went on. Those of us who were performing very high in in intellectual performance, in perception and memory, in our ability to see something and report back accurately what we had seen, who were performing at a high level in terms of our psychic ability. We found ourselves going on to even more unusual experiences at defense labs around the country. And those pretty much centered around the teleporter and chronovisor devices that I've described. We were essentially teleporting back and forth between New Jersey and New Mexico, and then after teleporting to New Mexico, they were keeping us there, involving us in time travel to past and future places, teleporting us back to New Mexico, and then back to New Jersey on the afternoon of the mornings we had left New Jersey. So part of the sort of the anthropology or the archaeological project I found myself on, going back and excavating my memories of Project Pegasus, is that I had to sort of deconstruct these timelines of what actually they had involved us in. And I was able to map everything in terms of the time and the place and the devices and the people and the events. And what I've been able to reconstruct, I think quite accurately, and I think my book will show this, is that in those 3 years, we were sent to 4 summers in New Mexico. So in the summer of 1970, they began us teleporting back and forth and introducing us to the phenomenon of quantum displacement, where you teleport somewhere and then stay there and do things, and then teleport back to, let's say, an hour after you left your point of embarkation. So that time loop sort of collapses. There's no evidence of it because you're back on your linear A timeline that you left. And then in 1971, I spent a long summer there. And then in fall of 1971, my father and I jumped to the beginning of the summer of 1973 in New Mexico and had a set of project experiences there. I was even able to find the rental house that we rented in White Rock, New Mexico, which is a small town near Los-Alamos. And I've been able to map hundreds of data points of things we encountered when I was on the project in New Mexico. Mm. And then finally, after having experienced the summer of 1973, before it occurred really to ourselves or others in our lives, we went back to New Jersey in the fall of 71. I completed the 5th grade. And in the summer of 72, my father and I spent our 4th summer in New Mexico in the summer of 72. And I must say that when I say summer of 71 and 72 in New Mexico, I have to speak of them as the first summer of 1971 or the first summer of 1972. Mm-hmm. Because when we doubled back to New Jersey via teleportation after spending several months in New Mexico during those summers, we lived our whole lives over again and in a different way on our original timeline. So those summers began again as my school year ended and different things happened. I remember telling my brothers one time when we were camping in Maine in the summer of 1972, shortly before we moved to New Jersey as a family, that we were coming back from the showers back to our campsite at Rangeley Lakes, Maine, and I said, this is the second summer of 1972 that I'm living. And they thought that was so hilarious that they actually pushed me off the trail. So in answer to your question, I've kind of gone long with my answer, but I was having a normal childhood, but I was being sequestered in the specialized learning environment. Yeah. And then by the summer of 1970, after we had spent that 3rd grade year in the learning lab, they then began to involve us in teleporting to New Mexico, and my life became very complicated from that point forward. But really, these were sort of excursions from my ordinary childhood. I didn't grow up thinking that I had a difficult or extremely complicated childhood. It was essentially a set of wondrous and also very terrifying experiences, because I had obligations. I mean, I was being treated, in these sequelae in my childhood, in the learning lab, in the defense contractor locations I was taken to where I was given specialized training, in the time travel itself, we were being treated like little soldiers, as if we had adult duties to the American people and to the government. And so it wasn't something we could opt out of. We had to basically buck up and time travel. And so I didn't have an ordinary childhood, but my childhood was left intact enough so that as I matured, I had very good feelings about my childhood because I had wonderful parents. exceptional siblings, and I was living in a great town in a great era of U.S. history.